Hello and welcome to the In the Beginning podcast. This week we spoke to Steve Thomas about his book, The Sangrook Saga, creating magic systems for your novel, and the line between fantasy and horror. If you missed Marie's introduction to the Sangrook Saga, or would like a refresher before the discussion, head back to episode 39. And speaking of my lovely co-host, she has deserted the podcast for the week and is working on the next chapter in the ACN universe. So I wondered, who would be best to help discuss necromancers and magic systems? Why, none other than my good friend, the famous DM Billy Beard. Say hi, Bill.
How you doing today, Ben?
You're supposed to say hi, Bill. As always, this discussion is brought to you by the wonderful people over at Shirts by Sarah. Stop by shirtsbysarah.com and find the shirt that completes your Halloween costume. So, Bill, what did you think about the beginning of this story?
That was very interesting, especially, was it two necromancers?
Yep, two brothers.
Yeah, two brother necromancers, and they seemed like they were trying to take like some sort of like demon or some type of soul thing.
Yeah, it starts right out with like a torture scene between a brother and a sister.
Yeah, because the brother breaks into the room and is trying to save his sister, and immediately something happens there. I mean, the book started off with action right off the bat.
Right off the bat. And there's blood right from the beginning. There's the two necromancers. You can tell that one of the necromancers is, definitely nicer than the other one, or appears nicer than the other one.
Yeah, I got that right from the beginning also.
Yeah. I really enjoyed the story. I will say though, towards the end of Marie's reading, there was a twist. Like the whole time you think the one brother, I keep thinking of him as the younger brother just because younger means nicer in my head when I'm reading books. Everybody places their own thing on the books. So the younger brother comes back when he left to go talk to that guy.
Yeah, he went, was it like a priest or something like that?
Yeah, like banished. He's not supposed to be practicing anymore, but he is. And he comes back to steal the lady's soul, and you realize he's not trying to steal the soul. The whole time you're thinking that they're trying to get her soul, and he's like, I'm not talking to you. And he's talking to the demon within her. Like, just hearing Marie say that, I got like chills while I was reading it. I was like, that's great. I love that.
Yeah, no, it was great. And it also opens up more pathways on how that the demon or whatever's inside you can be used. Especially if they share it. So, I mean, is it something like I've seen on TV shows where like he leaves her with a little bit? So does it grow back so she can regain her full power in the future and they become powerful together? Or...
Yep,
isn't that now,
just enough questions.
Yeah, and does he have enough power now to do what she wants, and she's just gonna suffer the rest of the time with the limited abilities she has now?
Absolutely, and I will say, this is one of those beginnings where I just know from where we left off, I'm gonna finish it. And luckily, I'm the lead of the podcast, so somebody got a special copy of this book already.
Yeah, so I didn't get no such special copy.
I could pass it on. So let's head over to some reviews, Bill.
All right, hi you. Rather than one continuous story, it's instead 7 separate short stories which tell the tales of different members of the Sangrook family through the years. This is a horror, grimdark novel. I'm not exactly sure where the line between them lies. If you're a fan of darker fantasy and horror, or like the idea of reading smaller pieces of a larger story, I'd suggest that you check it out. One bit of criticism from Hayu was, there was also a little bit of male gaze. He goes on to say that even though men and women alike were being tortured, the women were sexualized more than the men.
Now, I'll say this, and I don't even care if it's a woman writing the story. When you're thinking of beauty and the things you focus on, a lot of the times you just focus on the ladies. It happens no matter what gender is writing the story. That's just how it happens. But this is written from a male perspective. There are mainly male characters in the story, so who knows if the two necromancer brothers set it up like that anyways. Because would they want to see the dude naked, or would they want to just chop off his head and stare at a naked woman? I know that's sexist, but that's life. I mean, we're going to write how it really would have happened.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what you feel like your perceived audience is going to be, and also the perception of the person writing the book also is going to play a big factor in that.
Absolutely. And we do have to say we've only read the first part of the first story in this program, so who knows if the reviewer is talking about like a lot more stories in the tale. We'll find out when I finish the story. Philippe said, "The Sangrook Saga is dark, and its pages are stained with blood. Or they might as well be. This, ladies and gentlemen, is one grim dark tale of necromancy and blood magic. It might unnerve you and make you uncomfortable, and if you're not in for this sort of experience, you might as well stop reading here. But if you are, the Sangrook Saga might just be the book for you."
Juan, with a unique method of storytelling, this collection of stories involving the eponymous Sangrook line is a great page turner. It's weird, but it works. You get a good feel for how large scale the magic is. The magic, by the way, is pretty awesome. Great visual descriptions, and the actual logic behind the system is cool.
And Eric said, "It's dark, moody, bloody, and dreadful. The Sangrook Saga is all of these things and more. Thomas does a masterful job at evoking the feeling one gets when staring through the fog on a dark night. You know the feeling, that pervasive worry turning to certainty that something is coming to bring all manner of nastiness to your life." So this story is put together with a bunch of short stories. And we asked Steve, why did you choose to write the Sangrook Saga in this fashion? And were you inspired by other novels?
The short version is that I wanted to write a somewhat mysterious and ambiguous family saga, so A Story of Stories was a natural fit. To go deeper into where the structure came from, the Sangrook Saga started as a submission to a dark fantasy anthology being put together by a small press. The anthology was going to be about a family of necromancers where each author told the story of one generation. The publisher put together a list of writing prompts for authors to choose from and submit to. I wrote one, and the publisher came back and basically said, "We like your story, but we chose someone else for that slot. Would you be willing to write something for a different prompt that we couldn't fill from the open call?" I agreed and wrote them another story. And that was set to go into the anthology. Unfortunately, the press shut down before the anthology was published, and I found myself sitting on two related short stories. I was really interested in this project, and I really wanted to see it finished, so I decided to just do it myself. So I tossed out the original set of prompts, built my own setting and magic system, and made the project my own. As of the second part of the question, what other novels inspired that, I can't point to a specific inspiration. However, my comic fantasy series Klonde was structured in an episodic format modeled after serial TV shows, so I already had some practice with that Story of Stories model.
Many people probably don't realize how much goes into a D&D session. You are, published or not, an indie writer, basically, as a DM. What has inspired your writing, Bill?
Oh, things that inspire my writing. I mean, I've read all the Driss novels. I've been reading Dresden lately. I love the Dresden Files, which might have some similarities with here because he kind of does his own little magic system in there.
Yep.
Also, I mean, I get a lot from movies, music. I mean, I was just watching The Descent the other day, and the tunnels they were climbing through, I was like, I should add that to one of my sessions, and I do it with one of my other groups.
There you go. The magic system that Steve created has been praised in the reviews left for this book. Steve took a moment to describe the soul-binding magic system and an obstacle that arose in his writing because of it.
The fundamental mechanic of the magic system is called soul binding, where two souls are magically fused together. There are a lot of ways this can happen, which are revealed throughout the book, and soul binding forms a telepathic bond between two people and lets them share physical statuses like fatigue or health. Taken to an extreme with a large network, one person could sleep all day long and kind of absorb the fatigue from two other people so that they could pull an all-nighter. If a person soul binds to a god, either directly or indirectly, then that person gains access to a portion of that god's magic, kind of similar to divine magic in Dungeons and Dragons. The two main factions in the story are both religions focused on soul binding, but connected to two different gods. The Convergence is one, and they worship the converged god, who is an amalgam of gods all soulbound together themselves, and then their followers soulbind to those gods. Their ideals are community, harmony, and sharing each other's burdens. On the other side is the Sangrook family, who are bound via a strict hierarchy all the way up to a demon who's known by the name of the Despot. And the Despot is powerful enough to keep the converged god in check. So it's kind of a Cold War situation between these two factions and their respective gods. The Sangrooks operate on dominance, and they act more like parasites who will force soul bindings onto people to turn them into thralls and puppets to do their nefarious bidding. So these two factions are very different applications of the same magic system. Now, when I started building the setting for the Sangrook Saga, the magic system was the first thing I nailed down, and the setting and the overarching plot grew out of that magic system and the conflicts between its practitioners. So the culture in Convergence territories is completely dominated by their religion, since that's the natural outcome of a religion based on this all-encompassing telepathic web. Most of the stories in the Sangrook Saga take place in a time period after a war between the Convergence and the Sangrook clan, which the Sangrooks lost badly. They were ousted from their seat of power, and the survivors were hunted down or scattered. That left a power vacuum where we have these lands that were ravaged by this evil family of necromancers and are now either completely lawless or being consumed by petty kings and warlords. But the Sangrook remnant now are still working behind the scenes to infiltrate governments, enthrall people, and reclaim their power. Meanwhile, the Convergence is spreading into these areas over time. So that's just an example of how the magic drove the world building. It did take some effort to resolve the first two stories that I wrote for the anthology with this new magic system, since they were written before I came up with the soulbinding concept. With one of them, it was easy, because I kept the magic vague in that story, so I was able to just fold it into the existing infrastructure. With the other story, I had created a different magic system where magical devices were created by capturing the souls of animals and infusing them into artifacts. This turned out to be fairly easy to retcon into the soulbinding system, since it's not so different from the Sangrook flavor of soulbinding where human souls are taken. It's just that animal souls were taken instead and then stored in magical objects. So I got lucky there, and it wasn't too challenging to be consistent about the magic across the whole book.
So the setting and plot actually grew out of the magic system that he created. His magic influenced his writing. Has magic influenced any of your writing for your sessions?
Well, definitely. When you're DMing a group of multiple people, especially when you got wizards, abilities definitely influences what you do, because you have to realize what your party's capable of. Because when they get higher levels, a locked door isn't a big deal because a wizard just casts knock and it's gone.
Yeah.
So, you have to take into account to what their abilities are and try and twist things up. That way they have to use other abilities to get past certain obstacles.
So yeah, you're looking at all your players' magic systems and abilities before you even write it.
Yep.
To make sure it's not too easy or too hard.
Yeah.
But it does influence where you're going with your story.
Oh, it always influences, especially if you've got a group that likes challenging encounters. So you have to try and balance that out, and you have to know what their abilities are. You never know. That's the thing with like playing D&D, is you never know exactly what the characters are going to do. So I have to be a little prepared for everything.
Yeah, you got that one character that has fireball, and he's like, yeah, no, I'm throwing ice. And you're like, no, I knew he was throwing fire. I set it up for fire. Nope, now you got to write on the fly.
Yep.
Steve also mentioned that because he had written 2 short stories prior to creating the magic system, he had to go back and tweak them. He mentioned that he got lucky because one of the systems he used was easy to connect to the other one without hurting continuity. Have you ever added something into one of your campaigns that forced you to go back and do a rewrite? Now, spoilers are allowed. I will not let any of your players listen to this episode.
I've done plenty of rewrites, especially when I'm preparing for adventures, because sometimes, I'm writing up an adventure and I think about, I get the adventure going and written up, and then I realize that you guys had like some item from, a previous adventure.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, that would make sense if I were to put it in here. So I have to do that whole item. I might have to do the different layout for the things you're going against, depending on how you got the item or the things involved.
And then we forgot we had the item.
then you forget you have the item. So, I mean, if maybe you found like some sword in some other place, and then you go into a dungeon, you find out the sword fits like in a block of stone there. And when you do it, it activates something or does something special for you.
Yeah, we just fireball.
It's just fireball.
Sangrook is a dark fantasy novel. We asked Steve what he thought about the line between fantasy and horror, and what other genres he might like to mix with fantasy.
I think fantasy and horror have a shared heritage. Both evolved from the same myths and folktales of heroes and monsters, so the main difference tends to be tone. I'm about to generalize both genres, so forgive me, but there's a subset of horror where the problems and challenges are brought on by some seemingly undefeatable supernatural threat. And that's often the case in epic fantasy as well. The difference can come down to how successful that supernatural threat is and how the protagonists and readers react. Horror tends to emphasize dread and fear, while fantasy is usually building up to some kind of triumphant moment. For the Sangrook Saga, I use that sliding scale to add variety to the stories. They all fall on a different point in that spectrum of tone. In some, I lean very hard on the horror elements to drive tension and engage the reader, and in others, the fantasy elements are a little more prominent. Overall, the horror elements in the book informed my approach to how I conveyed information to the reader. Normally, if I were writing epic fantasy, I would want to give the reader as much knowledge of the world-building magic system and history as they're willing to entertain. I'd want the reader to understand everything very well so they have a firm grasp on the context of the story. With the Sangrook Saga, I wanted this tone of mystery and looming dread, so I limited the reader's access to information and left more in the background for them to deduce on their own. So they know the world is badly broken, the characters don't understand the history, the reader doesn't know what could still go wrong. But the reader does know that dark supernatural forces are in play, and humans have a bad track record when it comes to defeating them in this setting. As to other genres I'm interested in writing in, my Klondike series was comic fantasy, and my next book will also be comic fantasy. And in fact, I was a little surprised to find out that the skills I gained writing Klondike transferred over rather well to this book, and as it turns out, a joke and a horror story have pretty similar structures.
He likes writing in the comic fantasy genre, and I mentioned to him that I was going to pick up his book Klondike, the Monster Hunter. Now, by the way, Bill, when you're thinking of Klondike, just picture mango. But I also wondered about his thoughts on writing in a completely different genre, and if a pseudonym would be necessary.
Well, I hope you enjoy Klondike. I plan on sticking with fantasy for the foreseeable future. It's the vast majority of my reading and the genre I'm most interested in. I think when it comes to writing in different genres, a pseudonym can make sense from a marketing standpoint. An author would have to evaluate whether they can reasonably expect their fan base and reputation in one genre to transfer well to another. It's a question of branding, and I think the answer will vary from author to author. So if I were writing in a drastically different genre, I would definitely consider it a pseudonym.
Now, there are people who say write what you love and put your name on everything, but I have to agree with Steve. If you are writing in a completely different genre, look into using a pseudonym. Even Stephen King and Anne Rice use pseudonyms. Now, Stephen King gets away with writing multiple genres under the Stephen King name, but that's because he's famous. Like, don't let it get to your head. If you're not famous, people are expecting a genre from you. I mean, you are a brand. Your fans are looking for similar stories to the ones you've created before. All right, let me give you an example because Bill brought up the Drist series. Bill, you've just picked up the new R.A. Salvatore novel, and you get a few pages in before realizing that Drist is set down in scimitars and is now prancing around in the early 1800s in a Regency romance. How do you feel? Do you finish the story? And do you even pick up the next Drist without question? Drist is running around in the 1800s in a dress, just looking for the love of his life.
So he just flew into Eberron, I guess, or something. But some cyberpunk. I'd have to say, well, no, I'd probably definitely have to close that thing up after.
You'd definitely
a
be
few pages
disappointed
because, well, when I open one of those books, I'm expecting something.
Right.
I have an expectation of, generally what is going to go on.
And if R.A. Salvatore decided he wanted to write another story without Drist, but it was still fantasy, you'd still be okay because you're expecting R.A. Salvatore to write a fantasy novel.
Yes.
It doesn't have to have Drist, but it has to have some connection to the writing you were preparing yourself for.
Yeah, because I'd expect to at least see, well, I'd probably expect to see some Forgotten Realms because that's basically where Drist is based out of.
Yeah.
But I mean, it better be at least fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could even go as far as to say R.A. Salvatore could write a futuristic book with a lot of fantasy elements. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it has to have a lot. I could get away with that. But if he goes straight up romance, it better be Regina something. I don't even have a last name for him. He should come up with because I wouldn't pick up another book by him without a heads up.
I would expect, I mean, it'd be kind of funny if he did like some Warhammer 40K type fantasy. I mean, it would be different, but I mean, you'd still be expecting fantasy with him, even though it's a whole different.
Right. So if he wrote, I know you haven't read the book, but there's a series of books called The Lost Fleet. They're just a straight up military sci-fi future. That is unforgivable for R.A. Salvatore. Which, even though, I guess right now, because he's so famous, we could give it to him. But in his early days,
yeah, I'm pretty sure he's almost right about now. He could almost get away with anything.
He probably could put Drist in a dress.
Yeah.
And as always, we asked our featured author about going back in time. If you could summon some eldritch magic to go back in time and tell your early writing self one thing about the life of an indie author, what would that be? And what would it cost to your soul?
Well, since you brought it up, I would tell past me to get a pseudonym. Steve Thomas is a very common name, and I'm not even the only Steve Thomas writing books. However, it's a dangerous thing to talk about names with eldritch powers. If it should discover my true name, and it probably would, let's face it, I would wind up a mindless thrall journeying through the cosmos doing my master's dark bidding. So, I guess I'll just have to stick with the name my parents gave me.
Well, there you have it. The Sangrook Saga is available on Amazon. Remember to leave a review for this story and all of the stories you read as well. Reviews are such an important way to support an author, and they cost only but a moment of your time. Reviews help podcasters as well. As a self-funded podcast, there really isn't money left over for advertising. Your reviews, word of mouth, and love of books is what keeps Indie Beginning running. If you've enjoyed this show, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast platform. A special thanks this week to DM Billybeard for sitting in for Marie. All reviews in this episode were taken from Amazon or Goodreads. Music found in this episode was written and performed by Jazar and titled Look Inside. If you are an indie author and would like to hear your story featured on the Indie Beginning podcast, go to acnbooks.com/submit for more info. I am your host, Benjamin Frankie.
And I'm DM Billybeard,
asking everyone to read more books
and be the best possible you,
and to simply enjoy this wonderful life. Thanks for listening.
Oh god, stumped. Okay.